Today we're going to be learning Yevamot Daf Mem. It's the Daf for Shabbat and for the first day of Pesach, and which is nice because we're going to have some connection to Pesach, and that will be nice. So let's get started with our Daf. We had at the bottom of page Lamed Tet, Amud Bet, we had a Braita that started with the words Yevamah Yavo Aleha, and our Pasuk about Yibum, and they learned it's a mitzvah. And then they said, well, originally, before his brother married the woman, he could have married her if he wanted. Then second stage, his brother married the woman. Then she became forbidden because of Eshet Ach. She's the wife of his brother. And then we said, once it was Chazra v'hutra, it became permitted to him again. Yachol tachzor le'tera rishon. You might have thought she goes back to the original state. Talmud lomar Yevamah Yavo Aleha mitzvah. From here, we learned that it's a mitzvah. What does this mean? So we had two interpretations. One was Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi, who said this is all according to Abba Shaul. We saw there's a whole debate whether you can marry, you have to have the right intent when you want to marry her, that you want to marry just to fulfill the mitzvah. That's Abba Shaul. So the first is according to him, that originally you could have married a woman for any reason you wanted. Then came along, the brother married her, and now you can't marry her at all. Then when it became permitted, you might have thought you could marry her for any reason you want. At this point, no, you can only do it l'shem mitzvah, for the purpose of the mitzvah. Then came Rava. And Rava said, I can explain this even according to the rabbis. The rabbis say that originally, the rabbis say you can marry her for any reason you want. So therefore, that couldn't be the way to read the Braita. So they say, here we're going to have that originally you could have married her or not married her, right? Any woman, it's your choice. You can marry her or not. Obviously, she has to agree. But assuming she agrees, you can marry any woman you want. Then she became forbidden because your brother married her. Then when it goes back, reverts back, you might think you can marry her or not marry her if your brother dies. No, comes the Torah to tell you, you can't just do Yibum or Chalitza. You really should do Yibum. It's true, you have the option to do Yibum if you wanted, Chalitza if you wanted, but really, ideally, you should do Yibum. That's the way to read this Braita according to them. So now we're going to bring another Braita that has the exact same wording, but with a totally different topic. And then we're going to say, to who does this match better? And we're going to actually bring it as a question to Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi. It's not going to really work according to his interpretation. So here comes the pasuk. Matzot te'achel b'makom kadosh. Very relevant. We're about matzah. We're on the last few words of Lamed Tet Amud Bet. Now, this is not talking about matzah. This is talking about most sacrifices that were brought came with meal offerings. And meal offerings were often, or you could also bring a voluntary meal offering. Meal offerings were almost exclusively matzah, not made of, it couldn't be leaven, even though some of them can, most of them not. And it says here, matzot te'achel b'makom kadosh. What they're talking about here is, let me go back and explain what a mincha offering is. You take this fine flour, you mix it with water, some oil, depending on what it is. You put some frankincense later. We're not going to talk about that. But basically, you mix the dough. Then you put it in a sanctified bowl. So it becomes sanctified. Then you take the kmitza, the Kohen puts his 3 middle fingers in, dips them in, pulls them out. Okay, we're going to have a whole masechet about this called menachot. It's actually not a short masechet, so we'll know a lot about it then. He dips his 3 fingers in, and I'm not going to talk about the side fingers. They also have a function, but we're going to leave it right now. He takes 3 fingers in, he takes what's called a kometz. Then he burns it on the altar. What's left of the dough is called the shirayim. And that we are told, matzot te'achel b'makom kadosh. You should eat, the Kohen gets to eat that part. He has to eat it as matzah in a holy place, meaning in the azara. So now we say mitzvah. It's a mitzvah to eat them. Shebitchila, what does it mean it's a mitzvah? We're going to get to it, just like we had with Yibum. Shebitchila ita alav bichlal hatel. Originally, it was all chulin. It wasn't sanctified. You just took some flour, fine flour, mixed it with water. That's nothing. Ne'esra, then it became, when you put it in the sanctified bowl, it became kodesh, sanctified. You can't eat it at all until you take the kmitza. Chazra v'utra, after you took the kmitza and you burnt it on the altar, now the rest are permitted to eat. You might have thought you could eat it any way you want. Just like when I have my dough, I can do whatever I want with it. Talmud lomar matzot te'achel b'makom kadosh mitzvah. From here you learn matzot, only matzot, mitzvah. So how do we explain this? So let's try Rava's way of doing it, that it was either Yibum or Chalitza. And then we said really only Yibum. Here, this is how we're going to read it. Matzot te'achel b'makom kadosh mitzvah. Shebitchila, in the beginning, hayta alav bichlal heter. It was all permitted. Ratza ochla, ratza ein ochla. Right? You have dough in your house. You could decide to eat it. You could decide not to eat it. Then, No, the Gemara says, wait a minute. Then ne'esra, then it becomes forbidden. Then chazra v'utra. Yachol yachzor letera rishon. You might have thought it becomes back to maybe I can eat it, maybe I don't have to eat it, to do whatever I want. Ratza ochla, ratza eno ochla. So now the Gemara says, wait a minute. Ratza eno ochla. What kind of possibility is that to raise? You couldn't have thought that maybe I don't need to eat it. Of course you need to eat it. Haktiv v'achlu otam asher kupar bahem. And from there they learned, they ate it, and this was what they were told by. It means the Kohanim eat it, and the owner of the mincha offering gets atonement from the Kohen's eating it, which means the Kohen has to eat it. He doesn't have a choice. So, what could it possibly mean? Ela ratza hu ochla, ratza kohen acher ochla. Yes, it needs to be eaten by a Kohen, but theoretically it can be eaten by any Kohen. Talmud Lomo. Therefore, it says, b'matzot te'achel b'makom kadosh mitzvah. There's a mitzvah there's a mitzvah specifically for the person who brought the offering. If you're the Kohen who's working in the temple doing this mincha offering, you do the kmitza and you burn it on the altar, you should be the one to eat it. That's the special mitzvah. So you might have thought anyone can, any Kohen. In the end, it's you specifically. So that matches very much yibum chalitza, right? There's something that's better to do than something else. But now they say, but if you say, what two possibilities are there? Again, looking back at Rav Yitzchak bar Avdimi, what did he say? You can do it for the sake of, right? There's two ways to do it. Not different people can do it, or you can do it or not do it, and you can do it in different ways. But there's two different ways it can be done, right? Either l'shem noi or not l'shem noi. Right? You want her for her beauty, or you marry her just for the purpose of the mitzvah. So what are the two types of things here? So now they say, that's the best way to say it, right? You ate it because you were hungry, or you ate it on a full stomach and then you weren't hungry at all. So that would make the most sense, right? Because you married the woman for her looks, or you married her because you had a mitzvah incumbent upon you. So they say, no, achila gasa mishma achila. We don't call achila gasa, eating on a full stomach, is actually not food. It's actually disgusting to do that. How do we know that? Say if you eat it on Yom Kippurim, you're exempt from lo teuneh. It's not considered you've not afflicted yourself, because you did afflict yourself. Eating on a full stomach is disgusting. So it's not considered that you ate on Yom Kippur, right? It's an amazing thing to think about. You're actually not liable on Yom Kippur for eating. If you eat a sick amount of food, disgusting. So first of all, there's a bunch of interesting things here. I don't want to spend too much time because we have a long daf, but I do want to point out, it's hard to miss this when we're dealing with the first day of Pesach. So Tosfot here says, Achila gasan Yom Kippurim. Now, if you say, he says, there's a Gemara in Nazir, which says, he gives a mashal to two people. It says, the ways of God are straight, and tzaddikim should go in their ways, and Rishaim will fall there, stumble. So they say it's a mashal for two people that roasted their korban pesach. So great, we're talking about the day where we roast our korban pesach. One ate it for the mitzvah of Pesach, and one ate it achila gasa. And there he says, based on the sugya, it sounds like they both fulfill their obligations. It's just one did it in not a great way. So here, how can you say you're not chayv Yom Kippur for achila gasa, but you are if you eat your korban pesach that way? So Tosfot there suggests that maybe there's two ways of achila gasa. Maybe there's, sometimes you eat, you're full and you eat more. Okay, that's not terrible. Not to mention the pesach has to be eaten in general, ala sova, with a full stomach. There's obviously a fine line between full stomach and achila gasa. Another way, by the way, achila gasa comes up on Erev Pesach is you're not allowed to eat on Erev Pesach because in the afternoon, so that you go in hungry to the Seder. We don't want you to eat it achila gasa, eat your matzah achila gasa. So there we also have achila gasa coming up with Pesach. Anyway, the point is, Tosfot says maybe there's a range of what achila gasa is. One is absolutely disgusting, and one is just, you're kind of full, but you can eat. Anyway, right, it reminds me, I met someone once who told me that it actually made a strong impression on me. He only eats if he's hungry, right? How often do we only eat if we're hungry? And most of us eat all the time. You see good food, you eat. You don't really think, oh, am I actually hungry? Right? So there's obviously some fine line to draw between eat only when you're hungry, eat even if you're not so full, but you're also not so hungry, or, maybe you really shouldn't eat if you're already full. The other option, by the way, there's a lot of the commentaries ask the same question. The Tosfot asks, and they say that, I think it's the Ramban, he says that it could be that eating the Korban Pesach is different, and that maybe it's not a mitzvah of eating. It's a mitzvah that the Korban be completely consumed, but eating is a side thing. That's how you consume it, but it's not really a din in eating. Usually eating is getting pleasure, hana'ah, benefiting from. Maybe that's not the issue with the Korban Pesach. So that's also something interesting to think about in terms of, right, we don't have a Pesach sacrifice nowadays, but when they did, it's something interesting to consider. Okay, back to our topic. We're going to get back to Pesach one more time. Here it was just mentioned in Tosfot, but we're going to get to it in the Gemara very shortly. So it can't be l'te'avon and achila gasa, which would have been the obvious way, because it's just like the comparison of abashal, the two options. So now they say, ela ratza matzah ochla, ratza chametz ochla. Maybe it's, you can eat it if you want to eat it as matzah, or you want to eat it as chametz. Maybe that's what he means. So now they say, wait a minute. B'haktiv, how could you possibly suggest, how could you possibly suggest that you could eat it as chametz? Haktiv, doesn't it say, lo te'afeh chametz chalkam, which Rish Lakish translates, because it's a bit of a weird pasuk, don't bake chametz part of it. What does it mean, chalkam, their part? Rish Lakish says, afilu chalkam lo te'afeh chametz. He switches the order and he says, even part of it can't be chametz, meaning even the leftovers you can't make as chametz, right? Nothing in the temple was chametz. Okay, that was a whole. Many people give shiurim and compare why the temple had no chametz and Pesach has no chametz. But anyway, right, chametz is like a richness, a sort of over, you've missed, right? Yilachmitz means to miss an opportunity. There's all sorts to be said there, but not for today. So now, Ella, here's our second option, or really it's our third, right? We tried achila gasa, achila l'te'avon, we tried chametz and matzah, now we're going to try another. Ella, ratza matzah ochla, ratza chalut ochla. You know how bagels are made? Bagels are boiled and then baked. So there was a mincha offering that was also boiled and then baked. It's called chalut. Okay, it's a way of cooking it. So if you want, you can eat it as matzah. If you want, you can eat it chalut. You can take it. You might have thought that you can boil it in water and then bake it in the oven. So comes the Gemara and says, wait a minute. Hi chalut hechidami, right? And then basically the halacha would be telling you, no, only matzah. That's what the Braita says in the end. Matzot te'achel mitzvah. So the Gemara says, "Hi chalut echidami." What is chalut? What's it considered? Is it considered leavened, not leavened? I matzah, hi hamatzai. If it's matzah, well then it fits into the pasuk matzot te'achel. And ilo matzai, matzot amarachman. And if it's not matzah, how could we even have suggested that you could eat it? Of course you can't eat it. The shirayim have to be eaten as matzah, not chametz. So laolam em matzai. In the end, they say it really is matzah. There's a rule we're going to see when we get to Kodshim that when things are repeated twice, it means you have to do it that way. Now it's said in one pasuk matzot te'achel, as we saw, and it says in another pasuk va'achlua matzot. You have to eat it as matzot, also by the mincha. So now they learn because it says it twice, it means it has to be matzot. And what do we mean matzot? Prepared like matzot are baked in the oven, not boiled first. So that's what it means, and that we can then compare it to what Rav Yitzchak bar Avdimi. A little bit, not exactly the same, because originally Dimi was talking about your purpose, what you're doing it for, which fit better with the leteavon and the achila gasa. Here, it's not exactly your intention, right? But it's what you do with it. So now they say, now they have one last question, and now we're going to get to Pesach. So they say, ela chalut matzah de kamrina, and the fact that we said we classify chalut as matzah, but yet we don't allow the mincha to be offered matzah, the leftovers of the mincha. So then, for what purpose is it considered matzah? So they say, Lomar sha'adam yetzeh bo yedecha b'to b'Pesach. So now, right, this was all, and I want to just point this out very clearly. We had a question using this Braita on the explanation of Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi, how he explained the other Braita. We explained it in a particular way, but to do that, we had to say chalut must have been matzah. But in which case they're stuck now with one last point, which is if chalut is matzah, and we use that to answer the question, and that's why this Braita now can be parallel to the previous Braita about Yibum, according to Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi, then we basically still have this one issue, which is if chalut is matzah, why isn't it allowed? And then they say, well, it must be chalut is matzah. For what other purpose do we have matzah? Oh, for matzah on Pesach, that you could use matzah that was boiled and then baked on Pesach. So if you're listening to this before Pesach, you might say, oh, great, I'm going to go out and boil my dough and then bake it in the oven. That would be an interesting way to do matzah, or maybe find a place where they do it. So based on this Gemara, it would sound like it's permitted. And in fact, they say here, let's keep reading. Even though you boiled it first, remember, Pesach is not just, it can't be leavened, but it has to be poor man's bread. So they say poor man's bread also could be boiled and then baked, and therefore it's still within the category of lechem oni, and therefore Adam yetzebo yodei chovato b'Pesach, period. Sounds like you can really use this, but I just want to point out, just in case you really have an urge to go out and do this, not all the commentaries agree. I did not look up halacha l'maaseh, but not all the commentaries agree, and this is a very interesting methodological point, because this is a case where we were pushed into a corner and we had to answer, and we came up with this answer. That doesn't always mean that we paskin this way. Okay, so that's a very interesting point that comes up in many halachic sugyot, which is when you're pushed into a corner and the Gemara has to explain, well, how do we resolve this issue with, first of all, it's only according to Rav Yitzchak Bar Abdimi, we have to explain it this way. That's number one. Who holds like Abba Shaul, who we don't even hold by, or at least explain the Braita according to Abba Shaul. Anyway, reason to believe that we don't necessarily hold this way. Anybody wants to look it up, feel free. I didn't look up, like I said, halacha l'maaseh, what we hold. Next Mishnah. If you do chalitza to your Yevamot, you are like one of the brothers for nachala. Okay, so what does this mean? You did chalitza, you don't get rights because you did chalitza to the brother's possessions. And if there's a father, all the brother's stuff goes to the father if you did chalitza. But if you married her, then you get all the property of your brother. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, something very interesting, and we're going to see that some people even held like him, as opposed to what we thought before, which is anytime the brother does yibum, he inherits the brother's stuff. Well, the money always goes to the father. Meaning, if you're a brother and you do yibum, you don't get the possessions if your father's still alive. So first, the Gemara deals with the first line. We're going to go part by part. Pshita. It's obvious that, of course, if the brother dies without kids and someone does chalitza, and then if he does chalitza, he doesn't get the property. So what happens to his property? It gets divided up. Either it goes to his father, or if his father's dead, it gets divided equally among the brothers. So why do you need the Mishnah to tell us that? So they suggest first, you might have thought, if you do chalitza, it's in place of yibum, so maybe you would inherit. Comes the Mishnah to tell you, you do not inherit, right? There has to be some sort of disincentive to doing chalitza. Now, obviously, those who think chalitza is ideal, maybe you would think so, but, right, ideally, even by Torah law, ideally, you're supposed to do yibum, and if you don't, well, you're not going to get the brother's inheritance. So then they say, Ihachi, the wording doesn't make sense if so. It says he's like one of the brothers. It should have said, he is no different from any of the brothers. And it didn't say that. In other words, it's saying, if you didn't do yibum, well, you revert back to being one of the brothers, but it didn't say that. So therefore, they suggest something else. That's a really interesting one. You might have decided to penalize him for not doing yibum, and you might have thought maybe he loses any part of that brother's inheritance. Comes the Mishnah to teach you, no, that's not the case, which is interesting in light of, right, again, we talked yesterday about marrying someone, doing yibum for her looks, or maybe for the money, right? This seems to say we do use the money almost to incentivize him. So, and we hold like the rabbis, so one could understand maybe, but it is interesting. Im yesham av. So why does the father get it? Because this is just basic laws of inheritance. The Amar Mar comes up in Bava Batra, all the laws of inheritance. We're quoting from there. Av kodem l'chol yotzei yirecho. Father always gets first. Hakoneset yivim to, my time. So why, if you do yibum, do you get the nachala? Seen this drasha before, my time. So it says you'll be called in the name of your brother, right? The son that's born. And here he did it. He established it. He set up the whole thing for the brother, so he gets also to get his inheritance. It's not exactly clear how they get it from the wording here, but there's different interpretations, but it is a little complicated. The wording doesn't really fit perfectly. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Amar Ula. Now we're going to see who do we hold. Halacha ke Rabbi Yehuda, we hold like Rabbi Yehuda. V'chein amar Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha. Halacha ke Rabbi Yehuda. Amar Ula. V'tema Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha. My time to Rabbi Yehuda. So one of them who held like Rabbi Yehuda explained his logic. Dichtiv, Vaya b'chor asher teled. It says, and the firstborn that's born. Now they take out this word b'chor. B'chor is firstborn. That sounds like b'chor who inherits his father. Ki b'chor. So this brother is treated like the b'chor. This is to reference the law of a firstborn. Ma b'chor ein lo b'chaya av. When the father's still alive, the older son gets no more than anyone else. When the father dies, the oldest son gets double portion. But that's only going to be on the father's death. Therefore, af hainami ein lo b'chayei ha'av. If the father's still alive, he also can't inherit. Well, then maybe you would say, if he's treated like the b'chor, then when the father dies, maybe he should get the double portion of the father. So then it says, no, it doesn't say he will get his father's name, meaning he'll be a b'chor to his father. No, it says, Yakum Hashem achiv ktiv. It says, right, will be established in the name of his brother. So therefore, he doesn't get pishnayim from the father. The lo Hashem aviv, not his father. Now we have another suggestion. If you're going to compare it to the father, then maybe what it means is, so you want to say, when the father's alive, the brother doesn't inherit. Maybe you would think, now you might think this is absurd, but it's really not. If you say that he doesn't get the money, maybe when there's no father to get the inheritance, and then you get the inheritance to kayim mitzvah yibum, then you do the mitzvah of yibum. But when there's a father in the picture, and then the brother can't get the inheritance, maybe you wouldn't get the mitzvah, you wouldn't have to do the mitzvah of yibum. You'd be exempt from yibum in that case. So they say, wait a minute. Yes, it's true you get the nachala from yibum, but midi be yibum benachala. Are you trying to say that yibum is dependent on nachala? Of course not. Nobody ever said that. Yibum miyad, maybe you can nachala. Shekol lo shakil. The nachala is not the end all be all. If there's possessions, great, inherit them. If there aren't, or they went to the father, so you don't, but you still have to do yibum, of course. Yativ Rabbi Chanina Kara Kamed Rabbi Yanai. Now, so far we saw people who paskin like Rabbi Yehuda. Now, Rabbi Chanina Kara, which means he was a guy who knew Tanakh, he was sitting before Rabbi Yanai. Yativ Ka'amar halacha ke Rabbi Yehuda, and he said the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda. Amarle puk tane puk kare karyech lebara. Go take your psukim outside the Beit Midrash. No place for them in here. Ain halacha ke Rabbi Yehuda. And he got very upset at him, and he said, "Get out of here." Then Tane Kamed Rabbi Nachman, another person brings Braita. There were people who memorized Braita. He brings a Braita before of Nachman that says, "Ein halacha ke Rabbi Yehuda." We don't hold like Rabbi Yehuda. Amar le ela keman ke Rabbanan. What? So you want to say we hold like the rabbis? Pshita. That's obvious. All you're telling me, first of all, if you want to say we hold like the rabbis, you should say halacha ke chachamim. And anyway, what are you telling me? We always know we hold like the majority, unless you tell me otherwise. So Amar le ismiyeh. So he says, should I erase this from my book, or my head of my memorization of Mishnayot? Of Brightot, should I take it out? Amalei lo. He says, no. You must have learned this halacha. I'm assuming why you said ein halacha Rabbi Yehuda, because you must have heard it from someone who told you halacha Rabbi Yehuda. And then you said, this doesn't make any sense. And then you just flipped it and you said, oh, it must be, he must have said ein halacha Rabbi Yehuda, and you switched it. And the fact that you switched it was you were right to switch it. And therefore, keep it and make sure, seemingly, some of the commentaries say make sure that no one else gets confused by this. In other words, there were clearly different traditions going around, and I want to make sure that that people know the right answer. Now we're moving on to this other law. This is chalitza. Chalitza, you do chalitza. The issue is, right, we just talked about it's not exactly the same as yibum, you don't inherit. What about if you do chalitza, and now we're going to compare it not to yibum, but to divorce. When you divorce a woman, or a man divorces a woman, they're still forbidden to the other's relatives, okay? The man and wife, even though they're disconnected, he can't marry her mother, etc. She can't marry his brother, all sorts of things. So what if you do chalitza? Since chalitza is like gerushin, is like divorce, the rabbis instituted that we're going to treat it for the purposes of your relatives as similar. So comes the Mishnah, says, he's forbidden to her relatives and she's forbidden to his relatives. And now they're going to list all the relatives that they're forbidden to. So here comes our charts. Okay. Okay, so here's our situation. Yael had a family before this situation. She was married to Yiftach and she had a bunch of children. And we're going to go, as you see here, 5 generations. So she has parents, and their parents have parents. We're going to get to parents and grandparents. She has sons and daughters and granddaughters from the son and daughter. Then she gets divorced from Yiftach and she marries Reuven. In the meantime, Reuven dies. Once Reuven dies, she falls to Yibum to Shimon, Reuven's brother. If Shimon does chalitza with Yael, then what's going to happen is Shimon is prohibited to all these people. Okay, and now we're going to look at who all the people are. Okay, so Hu asur be'ima, her mother, Aim ima, her grandmother, through her mother, Aim aviha, her paternal grandmother, Ubibita, ubat bita, ubat bena, her daughter, her granddaughter through her daughter, her granddaughter through her son. Uba achota, and her sister, Bizman Shikayemet. As long as Yael is still alive, Shimon, who did chalitza with Yael, is going to be forbidden to Tamar, her sister. V'ha'achim mutarim. But any brother Shimon has, okay, I didn't bother putting him here, but assume Shimon had a brother, Levi. Levi would be permitted to all these people. Okay, they're not relatives of his because he didn't do chalitza. This, by the way, is a disincentive for a brother to do chalitza because it forbids him for all these people. V'hiasua. Now, what about her? So now we're going to have his family. Shimon, again, is the one who she's going to fall to Yibum to, who's going to do chalitza. She's married to Reuven. Reuven dies. And Shimon has grandsons, and Shimon has grandparents, and Shimon has a brother who has a son, meaning Shimon's nephew. So, Hiasura ba'aviv, u'ba'avi aviv, his father, his grandfather, bibino u'ben bino, his son and his grandson, and ba'achiv u'beben achiv, his brother and his nephew. Okay, those are all forbidden. Now we get to two other things that we've learned before, but we're going to see them a bit in a different context. Mutar adam b'krovat sarat chalutzato, v'asur b'sarat krovat chalutzato. Sounds like a mouthful. We'll go through it. What they're really trying to get at here is how similar is if the chalutza is considered like she's divorced. What about the tzara of that chalutza? How much does she have a connection to that chalutza? So let's see. These are, again, relatives that if you do chalitza, who are you going to be forbidden to? So Shimon does chalitza with Yael here. Now, when that happens, Shula was another wife. Yael and Reuven and Shula were married to Reuven. So when Shimon does chalitza with Yael, Shula had a sister Tamar. Is Shimon permitted to Tamar? So the answer is yes, because Shula did chalitza with Yael. That means he's going to be prohibited to Shula. Okay, Shula is going to be prohibited for a different reason. And this we're actually going to get to later today. Why? There's two possibilities. Either because once you don't do Yibum with her, her relationship to Shimon reverts back to, remember, Shula and Yael fell to Yibum to Shimon. But Shimon did chalitza with Yael. So Shula's exempt. She can go off and marry whoever she wants. But she's not allowed to marry Shimon. Why? Or any of his brothers for that matter, because either it just, the Isser of Eshet Ach reverts back, and she is the sister, she's the wife of Reuven, and therefore all of Reuven's brothers can never marry her, right? Unless it were a Yibum situation, which it's now, the Yibum situation is resolved. And then it's Isur Karet of Eshet Ach, or it's an Isur Lav. Remember, we learned that once Shimon does chalitza with Yael, he can no longer marry her because it says, right, Asher lo yakim et shem of achiv, because he did, I don't remember the exact word, but he was lo yakim et beit aviv, I think it's beit achiv. He didn't fulfill his brother's house, right? He didn't establish it, and therefore he's not allowed to anymore. And that's just an Isur lo taseh, which means the kids wouldn't be mamzerim if it's just a lo taseh. So some people hold that if Yael is lo taseh to Shimon, not only that, right? Everyone agrees that Yael. The question is Shula. Maybe Shula is prohibited because he didn't do Yibum with her, therefore he can't ever do it again. But that's a different reason. That's just an Yisro Lav. The kids wouldn't be mamzerim. It's a little bit less strong. In any case, let's explain what's this krovat tzarat chalutzato. So the chalutza is Yael. The tzara of the chalutza, that tzarat chalutzato, is Shula. Krovat tzarat chalutzato would be a relative of Shula. Since Shimon had really nothing to do with Shula, he was supposed to do even with her, but didn't because he took care of it with the other wife. So therefore, he becomes permitted to any of Shula's relatives. Okay, I gave the case of a sister. It could be a mother. It could be any relative of Shula's that would be prohibited. But asur b'tzarat krovat chalutzato. But he's forbidden to, okay, the tzara of the relative of his chalutza. This is kind of the reverse case. Let's see. David is married to Shula and Tamar, and Yael is married to Reuven. What happens in our story? Reuven dies. Yael falls to Yibum to Shimon. Shimon does, right? David is not related. We're going to get back to David in a minute. Yael does Yibum Chalitza with Shimon. So now Yael has a sister Tamar who's married to David, who is also married to Shula. That's where they're going to come in the picture. So again, the Chalitza was done with Yael, whose sister is Tamar. So now Yael is the Chalutza. The relative is Tamar. Asur Adam b'tzarat chovat chalutzato. Since Yael is the one who Chalitza was done with, and she has a sister, her sister's second wife or co-wife is going to be forbidden as well. Okay, so what's the situation? I mean, they're both married to someone. What would be the situation? Well, if David was to die or divorce both his wives, then Shula would be prohibited to marry Shimon because he did Chalitza with Yael, and that's close enough. Okay, so you see it goes close on that side, but not on the other. I can't believe I said, okay, we did all that, right? Did I do? Yeah. Okay. Now, Ibayalu. Now the Gemara is going to ask a question. And this is going to take us to almost the end of the daf. Did they say that shniot are a problem also for chalutza, or just the first degree arayot? Or is it also the rabbinic ones, the second level, right? Remember, we had all those rabbinic arayot. So they want to know, did they do this for a chalutza or not? So they ask. They say, be'erva, do we say, be'erva de'oraita gazru rabbanan shniot, but b'chalutza lo gazru rabbanan shniot? When it came to de'oraita, so came the rabbis and they said, let's add shniot. But when it comes to a rabbinic issue, which is just to say that the chalutza is like a grusha, we're going to forbid all her relatives, maybe there's no reason to add on shniot. Or odilma lo shna, or maybe they didn't distinguish it. They said shniot or a rayot everywhere. Wherever we have a rayot, we instituted a rayot by a chalutza also. We're going to say she's as if she was married to him. So it includes shniot as well. What we're going to do is we're going to first try to assume it from cases in the Mishnah. So Tashma, huasor be'ima or be'emima, her mother and grandmother. Ilu emima lo katani. It doesn't say her great-grandmother. It says her grandmother, not her great-grandmother. Great-grandmother would be shniot. So it's not mentioned. It must not be. I say, no, it might not have been mentioned for a different reason. Because in the end, it wasn't really the end, but the end of that section, it said, ha'achim mutarim. Now, if you said, it says, and the brothers are allowed. Now, if you had brought up the third generation, the great-great-grandmother, then itana aim emima. If you had the great-grandmother, havamina ha'achim mutarim dafka be'aim emima. Aval be'aim emima u'be'ima lo. You might have thought the brothers are permitted only to the great-grandmother. Maybe that will permit. You would have distinguished if it added shniot into the Mishnah. You would have said the brothers are permitted to the shniot, but not to the regular arayot. So then they say, well, if that's the case, then you could have added the great-grandmother, but you then could have said in all of them, and then it would have been clear. Kasha. That's in fact difficult. So maybe you could use this to prove, but it's not clear. Next case, Tashma. Let's learn from here. She's forbidden to the father and the grandfather, right? Through his father. Okay, I'll bring up the sheet. You can look at the charts, the presentation. Let's go back to the cases. Okay, so we have her and, right, her grandfather, right? Sorry, his grandfather. We're up to right? His father and his grandfather. So now, it says avi aviv. My love mishum choletz. Now, why is the avi aviv, the grandfather, a problem? Because of Shimon, we assume, right? Now, assuming it's a problem because of Shimon, who did chalitza to Dina. Now, what's the relationship between Dina and the grandfather of her chalutza? She's not the daughter-in-law, or the granddaughter-in-law, but she's like the granddaughter-in-law because we're treating her as if she was married to Shimon. Now, kalat bito is the daughter-in-law of your son. Kalat beno is the daughter-in-law of your son. That's her relationship to Yitzchak. And if that's the case, that's a shnia. So here we have a case of shniot in our Mishnah. That should prove it. So they say, no, wait a minute. Yitzchak is forbidden to Dina, not because of Shimon. He's forbidden to Dina, mishum mitana, because of the guy who died, Reuven. Tahavila kalat beno. It's actually kalat beno through marriage. In other words, it's the marriage case, not the chalitza case. We're trying to get an answer about chalitza. And we're going to see this over and over. We're going to notice that a lot of these relatives were forbidden to Dina anyway because she was married to Shimon's brother. So Shimon's grandfather, through his father, is clearly Reuven's grandfather through his father, which means it doesn't teach you anything about the law of chalitza because it just has to do with the fact that she was married to Reuven. Once Reuven dies, all of his forbidden relatives remain forbidden to her. So therefore, you can't learn it from there. Tashma, V'ben beno, what about his grandson? right? This is Shimon has a grandson. This clearly isn't from Reuven, or at least we don't think, and we'll see. Right? It's the wife of, in other words, David, who's Shimon's grandson. His relationship to Dinah is his grandfather's wife. So that's why. And then, right, that's a shnia. So they say, lo, mishum mitana. Actually, Reuven was also, because when she was married to Reuven, before Shimon came into the picture, she was forbidden to David. Why? Tahavile eshet achia bi'aviv. Remember that case? It's the brother of your great uncle. It's your great uncle's wife. Okay, Reuven is David's great uncle, and that's forbidden. So that's why, meaning it is shniot, but it's shniot having to do with her marriage and not having to do with her chalitza, which teaches us nothing about chalitza. So they're going to have a side problem with this, which is ha-meimar machshor be'eshet achia bi'aviv. But a meimar actually permitted that case. Maybe you'll remember that sugya. We had a whole sugya about this. A meimar permitted it, meaning it's not even usher. So meaning you can't say it's forbidden because of Reuven. She's forbidden because she's married to David's grandfather, which is Shimon. She wasn't married to him, but we're treating it as if she was married, and that would be a shnia, and then we have our proof. But we're now going to have a creative explanation that when it says aviv and avi, we thought it meant the father and the grandfather of Shimon, and beno ben beno, we meant the grandson of Shimon. No, starts off and it says she's forbidden to his relatives, she's forbidden to his father and his father's father. And his son. Now, who's his son referring to? His son could be referring to, and the father's son and grandson, which means we're not going down 2 generations to shniot. We're going down 1 generation, meaning, or keeping on the same generation. It means Yaakov's son and grandson, which means, see, there's a little mistake here. This should be someone else, not Moshe, but Levi. He would mean Yaakov's relationship to Shimon, right? Yaakov's sons and Yaakov's grandsons, which means basically Shimon's brothers and Shimon's nephews. Okay, so then we don't have an issue. If that's how a meimar can explain this, we have one problem, which is ihachi, achiv ben achiv, Tana, right? So it says in the Mishnah, his brother and his nephews. So you're not going to say his brother and his nephews once when you're relating to Yaakov. Yaakov's grandson and great-grandson means, Yaakov's grandson and son, right? Aviv, beno, ben beno, right? Yaakov's son and grandson, which is equal to achiv and ben achiv, which is brother and nephew, they mean the same thing. So they say ano. It means 2 different things. Tana achiv min ha'av. First it says your father's father, and then your father's son and your father's grandson. When it says achiv and ben achiv, it means your brother from your mother and your nephew from your mother's side. And then that's not in this picture at all. I didn't bother making a picture. It's just obvious we mean the same thing, but through his mother, not just through his father. Okay, and that's a way to possibly explain things according to a meimar, in which case we'd have no answer about shniot because none of these cases are shniot. Then we say tashma. Let's try another source. Tani Rabbi Chia. Rabbi Chia says, our Mishnah had 6 relatives. Rabbi Chia had 8. Arba midivrei Torah, Arba midivrei Sun-Fri. 4 from the Torah, 4 from the rabbis. Av ubeno, that's on our list. Achiv uben achiv, right? A father and son, and a brother and son of the brother, midivrei Torah. Those we all have in our Mishnah. Avi aviv, va'avi imo. Okay, avi imo is new. She wasn't in our Mishnah. Ben beno, grandson from the son, and ben bito, and grandson through the daughter. So those 2 are new. That the father on his maternal grandfather and his daughter's grandson, his daughter's daughter. Sorry, his daughter's son, because we're talking about is forbidden to Dinah. So now, right, those are midivrei Sun-Fri, those second 4. Katanimia, now what's listed here? Now we're going to go back and say something we already did. Avi aviv. Now here they're going to ask on Rabbi Chia the exact same thing we asked on our Mishnah and then changed, right, answered it. My lav mishum choletz, the grandfather, is it not because of chalitza? V'havi lekalat beno. Lo mishum mitana davi lekalat beno. In other words, it's not the kalat beno of Shimon, it's the fact that she was the daughter-in-law through Reuven when she was actually married to Reuven, in which case it teaches us nothing about chalitza. Tashma avi imo. What about his maternal grandfather? My lav mishum choletz, davi lekalat bito. Right now, this is also a shnia. It's the kala of it's the daughter-in-law through his daughter, right? The granddaughter-in-law through his daughter's daughter-in-law. So they say, now also, lo mishumitana davia kalat bito. You would assuming that Reuven and Shimon shared the same mother and father, then again, the relationship to his maternal grandmother is the same as from Reuven as it is from Shimon, in which case we can attribute this whole relationship to the problem that she was Shimon's wife, Reuven's wife to begin with, and not having anything to do with the chalitza. Tashma ben beno. What about the grandson? My love mishum choletz tahavila eshet avi aviv. This is the exact same thing we did before, right? David is because of Shimon. It's his grandfather's wife, which is a shnia. Lo mishumitana. No, it goes with Reuven. It is a shnia, but it has to do with the guy she was married to and not the chalitza guy. Tahavila eshet avi aviv. But what about Amemar? Because remember, Amemar says that's not even erva. Even according to the rabbis. Amemar machshir be'esh dachi avi aviv. Amemar mokim la mishum choletz. V'kasever gazru shniyot b'chalitza. Amemar says this is due to chalitza. And according to Amemar, yes, it's not a problem through Reuven. It's only a problem through Shimon. And in fact, this proves that according to Amemar, there are shniyot for the one who's choletz. So at least we have an answer that according to Amemar, there are shniyot. And chalitza, that's what we've been looking for all along. Well, we still want to find out what about according to those who disagree with Amemar. So, Tashma ubeben bito, the son of his daughter. Okay, so imagine Shimon had a daughter and the daughter had a son, right? Had a daughter. Okay, no, had a son. I said it right. Right? Shimon had a daughter who had a son, and that would be forbidden to Dana. So, my love mishum choletz tahavila eshet avi imo. So they say, right, again, what is it? It's his grandfather's wife. Same thing, just through the mother. So now, lo mishumitana, it's because of Reuven. Tahavila eshet achi avi imo, right? It's the wife of, and that's what's the relationship of Shimon's grandson through the mother to Reuven. It's the guy at the bottom, right? The grandson. It's his mother's, right? The eshet avi imo, the mother of his father, his wife, right? It's Shimon's wife. If we tried to say it about Reuven, it would be eshet achi avi imo. It would be the great uncle's wife. Now, the great uncle's wife through the mother is not an issue. We've already learned that, right? That's something. They weren't gozer on that case. Only eshet achi, the brother, that they're brothers through the father, not through the mother. So that's not even shniyot. So she wouldn't be forbidden to Reuven for that reason, in which case we've proven it. From here we infer that they do the gzera of chalitza, of shniyot. So if Shimon's choletz to Dina, not only is she forbidden to all his first degree relatives from the Torah, but even the ones that the rabbis instituted. Now, we finish up with this last part. Mutar Adam, this is the whole thing about the tzarat, the krovat tzarat, right? Asur b'tzarat krovat chalutzato, the tzara of the relative of the woman who did chalitza. Amar Rav Tuvi bar Kisna, Amar Shmuel, habal tzarat chalutza, havlad mamzer. Now we go back to that original case where we had two wives. One did yibum and Shula didn't, right? Or one did chalitza, and Shula didn't. So what happens if Shula wants to marry one of the brothers, right? Is it Isur Karet, because it just reverts back to Esharach, or is it Isur Lav, just like the woman who did Chalitza can't marry any of the brothers because Asher Lo Yivneh, that he will never be allowed to rebuild his family once he does Chalitza. Maybe they're the same as that, and then it's only Isur Lav. So came Shmuel and he said, if you sleep with, a brother sleeps with Tzarat Chalitza, in other words, Shimon, who did Chalitza, sleeps with the Tzara of the woman he did Chalitza with, the second wife, Havlad Mamzer. Okay, he says it's kari. She basically reverts back to Esharach. My time, Isura Kaima, she goes back to her original forbidden nature that she was, is his brother's wife. He can't marry her. Amar Rav Yosef, Afananami Tanina, we can prove it from our Mishnah. Mutar Adam bekrovat sarat chalutzato. Why are you permitted to again, it's the chalutza has its sarah and her relative. Why are you permitted to her relative? Because if you basically say we're taking the tzara out of the picture now, and that's why she just reverts back to Esharach. She's not part of this chalitza story anymore, the chalitza narrative. That makes sense then. Why her relative has nothing to do with this? Mishum hachi mutar ba'achota, right? Her sister would be permitted. But if you say the tzara is just like the chalutza, meaning she has the same law that it's chayve lavim, and she can't marry because he didn't marry her. Therefore, he can't. He's on a low tase. He can't build the family of the brother from any of the other wives as well. Well, then amay mutal. She's basically considered like the chalutza herself. So lema tavitiyufta de Rabbi Yochanan. Now this should raise a problem with Rabbi Yochanan's approach. He was the one who said that it's karet. Damar bein hu. I'm sorry. He said it's isur lav. Right? No. Sorry. He said it's isur karet. Damar bein hu bein achim en chavim lo chalutza karet velo al tzarata karet. He said, sorry, I just got confused for a minute. Rabbi Yochanan's the one who said that it's isur lav. You're not chayav nan on the chalutza karet, nan the tzara karet. They're equivalent. Now, if they're equivalent, then the relative of the krova, of the tzara, of the chalutza should be just the same, because the tzara is treated like the chalutza. So last thing for today, Amar Lecha Rabbi Yochanan is going to answer. Wait a minute. You want to say that the tzara is like the chalutza, and therefore we're going to forbid her relatives as well. Now, why are we forbidding her relatives? We're forbidding her relatives because the rabbis made takana that we're not going to allow someone to be connected with any relatives of somebody who does chalitza with. We're going to treat it as if she's divorced. So comes the Gemara and says that Rabbi Yochanan can answer and say, what you think it's d'oraita, that we're going to be strict and not allow her relatives either? She herself is only forbidden because we're treating a chalutza as if she's divorced and therefore forbidding all her relatives, more so because we want to be strict about this chalitza, but it's all rabbinic. So we're not going to take it farther and then forbid the tzara's relatives. That's already, distant. Marrying your sister, the sister of your chalutza, is only rabbinic. So we're not going to be gozer not only on the sister of the chalutza, but the sister of the tzara of the chalutza. That's already, there's no reason when it's only rabbinic to begin with. When a grusha, maybe we'd be more strict with the grusha. Obviously, grusha, the tzara has no relation to her, so it doesn't really matter. But grusha is d'oraita, chalutza is d'Rabbanan, and therefore we're not going to be strict. With that, we'll finish our shiur for today. Chag kasher v'sameach to everybody.